Unfiltered by Jade.
Jade.
Welcome to the Unfiltered by Jade, where we educate, empower, and entertain. Feel free to like, share, subscribe, download, donate, and make everybody know about this.
Beats by RB Records.
Shopping assistance, your style, your budget. Our services include online and local shopping for individuals and businesses, personal shopping, purchasing of company and office supplies, importing and exporting small packages across Jamaica and worldwide, and helping you find unique gifts and items for all events and occasions. Contact us at 876-919-5195 or shoppingassistance2015@gmail.com. Shopping Assistance, your style, your budget.
Welcome back to the Unfiltered by Jade. Today we have with us here a special guest. His name is Dr. Jojo McManus, and we're going to be speaking about his book, A Brother's Insight. And I must say, this is a book that I believe everyone should read. I believe everyone should pick up this book and give it a read. It will change the mindset that you have, regardless of how you feel about racism, right? Okay, so Dr. McManus, he is an award-winning author, an executive advisor, a strategist, anti-racism advocate, consultant, educational leader, and speaker. Dr. Jojo, how are you?
I'm doing all right. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Thank you so much for being here. So I want us to just dive into this. I want to ask you first, what was the purpose, for those who are listening, what was the purpose of you deciding to write this book?
Well, the purpose was to address a challenge that was given to me by my daughter. Watched the George Floyd video together. She was about 9 or 10. And, afterwards she asked me, isn't this the kind of thing that you're supposed to help us avoid? Because this is the kind of work I do. And I said, yeah, me and, Granny Jane and, Auntie Kathy and Uncle, Eddie and all these people. And she cut me off and she said, it's not working. You got to work harder. You got to do more. And, I come from a blue collar family. So telling me that I'm not working hard enough is hard. But I put a lot of thought into it. I couldn't put in more hours. There just aren't any more. But the one thing I hadn't done is share my story in book form and, try to share what I've learned over the years so that people can empathize better around issues of race and racism and learn to do better. So that's really the purpose of it.
Awesome. So thank you so much for your daughter for even pushing this. I want to get into the little girl because for me, I think that was a profound story. And I don't think many of us actually put it together when we think about it in our mind about how it is that we try to defend ourselves. So I want you to give us a synopsis about that story, the little girl.
Yeah, so this was, when my brother Casey and I were young. My brother Casey was adopted and African American, and I'm white. And we were with my mom at a doctor's office in Boston. We grew up in a town south of Boston. And I don't even remember what we were there for, but, she left us alone in the waiting room to go talk to the receptionist or whoever. And there was a little girl there that my brother, who was very friendly, wanted to play with. So he dragged me over there. I was less friendly. And we just started playing, and Casey introduced us. He said, hi, I'm Casey. This is my brother, Jojo. And we were playing and just sort of sitting there with her. He said, is it okay if we play with you? And the little girl responded by saying no and using the N-slur toward my brother. And I don't want to give away the whole story, but if you have siblings, especially if you're the eldest like myself, you feel like your job, especially when you're young, is to protect them. So I was very angry. I knew I couldn't, hit this little girl, but I unloaded on her with every bad word I knew.
From that story, it showed how important or the impact that our parents have on us.
Yeah. And so, I think the takeaway from that story was that even though it upset mom because she heard it and came running, at the end of that sort of experience, Casey said to me that he thought that the little girl may have learned something from him. And this is coming from a kid. I mean, we were little kids, and the girl was even younger. She was probably 4. And, so for my brother to be self-aware enough to be the one that pulled me back
Yeah.
and and recognize that maybe we could teach her something had a huge impact on me, and
Yes.
not in the moment. I thought he was crazy, right? But later on, we reflected on it together when we were teenagers. He said, do you remember the little girl? When there was something else going on and he wanted, we had an opportunity to educate somebody else. Because you know what that was, right?
Yes. That's interesting.
Mm,
And it also showed what he was going through.
yeah.
Because if he was young and he already had that mindset in terms of, we could teach her something, it showed that there was a lot happening or going through his mind that he probably wasn't even verbalizing.
Right. I mean, we were like any teenagers, right? Any kids. We were going through the drama of our life. I was born in 1970. He was born in 71. And, just like everybody goes through. But on top of that, he was also dealing with racism.
Right.
And it has a cumulative effect. Everybody seems to know what microaggressions are now, right? Small experiences with bias, in this case, racism, that sometimes they're not so small, by the way.
Right.
But people seem to think, particularly white folks seem to think that, it's an experience, it's not that big a deal, and you just move on. And then the next time it happens, there's no, impact from what happened before, but it's really cumulative. And it
It is.
continues to build and have impact over time.
Yes.
And that happened with my brother.
I mean, and that's happened with your brother, but that also impacted your family.
Yeah.
It had a great impact on your family also.
Yes. So, I mean, one of the things that I talk about in the book is that we lost my brother to suicide. He was 17, I was 18. Anybody that's experienced suicide or even had suicidal ideations can understand that it's different.
Yeah.
It's the loss of any loved one is awful, but there's a lot that goes along with losing a person who took their own life, who was a victim of suicide. And I say that specifically because too often we say somebody committed suicide as if, they're to blame, and I think it's important to recognize that, suicide is not something that anybody aspires to. Nobody's, doing this, because they want to have a particular impact. It's because they're going through something. And in his case, it was, what a lot of young people go through, just different things around college and all that kind of stuff. But also there were just so many things, including something that happened toward the end of his life that was just blatantly racist and had a huge impact on him.
Thank you also for giving us that perspective on that and clearing that up, because I think people use it so loosely. This person committed suicide without even thinking what had caused it.
Yeah.
You know?
I think it's important to say that the book is I hope more of a celebration of his life than a focus on his passing, and realizing how much he did teach so many of us.
Yeah.
And I say in the book that, unfortunately, this would be a much better book if he was writing it, if he had written it. Obviously, there'd be a lot better stories and a lot more. But we had a wonderful childhood in a lot of ways. And, I think that's reflected in the book and some of the chapters that we may discuss. So I don't want the readers to get the idea that it's all about that, but it had a huge impact on me in the direction of my life.
I want us to touch on lies our teachers told us.
Well, that chapter really speaks to the work that I've done my whole life, which is around education and specifically anti-racism and inclusivity, around all sorts of aspects of diversity in our education. And there's a book that this is sort of a riff on called Lies My Teacher Told Me, that was written by a white Smithsonian researcher who was at the Smithsonian Museum, doing research and realizing that a lot of what we've been taught in schools was mythology and just simply not true. And it wasn't that teachers were purposefully telling lies necessarily, but that they also weren't taught the truth. So in many ways, right now we're dealing with a resurgence of that with the banning of important books and the attempts by the current administration on the federal level to curtail and even outlaw some things that are taught in classes that are simply fact and important facts. I think we can't learn, um, from our history if we don't know it, right? And we also miss out if we don't learn from different perspectives in literature and science and everything else. Excluding, we're actually hurting ourselves, all of us. So I think it's important for us to be very vigilant right now and looking at what books are being banned and just the idea of banning books. How ridiculous is that, right?
Right.
The idea that we can outlaw teaching African American history or studies, that we can say that people can't protest about certain things because that's not what the federal government agrees with. These things are very, very dangerous.
It is. It is.
Yes.
You had said something particular in this chapter that kind of stuck with me when you said, you think teachers, they also need to be re-educated in regarding racism, racial justice, white supremacy, within a large understanding of social justice. So even what they were learned regarding curriculum, etc., these things also need to be taught because they're not just teaching or dealing with white students. There's a melting pot, right? So you have to deal with racism comes up in there. How, as a teacher, do you deal with these things? So that was important that you have even stated that in the book. It's important that teachers relearn these things and get some more understanding or ideas of it because they are dealing with kids also who are dealing with these problems.
Right. And I think that it's important. And any good educator, teachers, professors, whatever they might be, is a lifelong learner. Right? Because whatever your field is, I don't care what it is, there's always more to learn. And to be the best teacher that you can be, you have to continue to engage in your field, whether it's biology, language, arts, history, it doesn't matter. You have to continue to be engaged in your field to be able to really teach well. And so I think that it's just a part of that ongoing lifelong learning and professional development that teachers learn how to teach, diverse kids. Kids learn differently, right? Every kid, regardless of background, there are a lot of different, why different children learn differently. We don't all learn best from a lecture, right?
Right.
So even that, the pedagogical component, the teaching component, they continue to learn. And then they have to continue to learn their content. So whatever it might be, you've got to continue to learn. And an aspect of that is to be actively opposed to racism, sexism, homophobia, and other forms of oppression, because just being non-racist or, just saying, oh, well, I'm going to be neutral on this does damage, because children are going to hear biases in the media. They're going to hear it online, so much online, and even a lot of them may hear it at home as well. And so it's a responsibility of educators to do better and to be actively helping students understand different perspectives and understanding their role in making, not just this nation, but the world a better place for all of us by opposing these kinds of exclusionary and oppressive systems.
Let's talk about the PACI.
That may be my favorite chapter, because first of all, for your listeners, a PACI is Massachusetts speak for a liquor store. And I grew up in the back of a liquor store in an apartment. And my parents worked in the liquor store, and it was sort of my community, right? So all the regulars that were coming every morning to get there and some other stuff, were part of the family, and they felt like part of the family. When I left for school, there were people there. And when I came home from school, there were people in the store asking me about my day, and I'd be talking to my parents, and they'd jump in and they knew the teachers, and, they'd say, oh, I didn't like that teacher. I love that teacher. It was our community, right? And you can imagine it's an interesting cast of characters. But, they were also a very diverse group of folks. The liquor store was sort of right in the middle of a white flight neighborhood, a Puerto Rican neighborhood, and a Cape Verdean neighborhood. And there was a few different kinds of folks mixed in. But these are the folks that were, in the store. These are the folks that were our extended family and our Packy community, if you will.
Right.
And I also talk in there about my dad built a basketball court behind the Packy that, because there was a delivery area, right? That was about the right size. And so he had his friend who did the paving, make it just right. And then they put up the hoops and it became the neighborhood spot, and people from all around would come and play basketball there. And I learned a lot about leadership and about, diversity and ball on the court. Behind the Packy. So I don't know if there's any particular part of that chapter you want to talk about, but I think that's probably the one I enjoyed writing the most.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it just showed community.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what stuck out to me from the chapter, the community of it. Someone falls in a hole. Can talk to us about that.
Sure. That chapter is really about, what it takes, when you go through a lot. So for me, my brother's passing, left me, broken. I was 18 years old. I was just finishing up high school, didn't know what I was doing next. And it was that community, that I originally developed in the Packy and my friends who helped, And I remember when my brother passed, it was my grandfather, who was a very no-nonsense blue-collar guy, right? He ran a fix-it shop. He fixed lawnmowers primarily, and just a great guy. And he was, didn't have a lot of words most of the time, but when he did speak, it was worth listening to. And when my brother passed, everybody was trying to console, and do what everybody does when somebody passes. You don't know what to do really, And my grandfather took me for a ride in his car, which was a treat, And so I wasn't really feeling like talking, but he decided to take me for a ride, and he said that everybody's going to tell you that it's going to get better, but they're wrong. And he told me that you'll sort of get used to it, but the pain isn't going to go away. His honesty in that moment really mattered to me because it felt real. And he was telling me that, I had other reasons I had to live, and I had to carry my brother's legacy on and teach my kids about him and other people. And, he would want me to keep going. In his own way, he helped me so much because while everybody else was trying to tell me it's going to get better, he was like, not really, because he'd lost his brother, right? In a similar way, in a much older age, but, he lost his brother, and he said it hurts every day, but there's a reason that you keep going, and we talked about that. And I think that chapter in particular is really about the power of, community, relationships, and I think that's where I first start talking about solidarity. And there's a quote by Cornel West that says, "Justice is what love looks like in public." And that really inspired me while I was writing this chapter because and it inspired me to write that solidarity is what love looks like in community. And right now, I think that's so important. There's so much going on right now. There's this flooding of what seems like the most awful things happening to so many different people.
Right.
And the only way that we'll get through this, from my perspective, is through solidarity across communities. And to me, that's what love looks like in community, is solidarity, right? And so when I see protests and I see people coming together across differences, that's important. Beyond what they're trying to say, talking about immigration issues or talking about women's rights or whatever it is that's the moment is bringing together people, it's that solidarity that gives me hope.
Yes.
Because I think that's where we start to make progress. And I think the other piece of it is the reason that this is happening historically, this is a cycle, right? If you look back to Reconstruction in the United States, right? Reconstruction was followed by Jim Crow. Reaction, an angry reaction. And this is very similar. We have been making some progress, and DEI, is being demonized, but diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice work has made progress. We're not there. We're not at a point of full solidarity or, equity for everyone. We're not there, but we've made real progress. And because of that and the demographic shifts, it's really upsetting people. And I think just one more point that I want to make is that I think that there's an important point of empathy to have with some of these MAGA folks who are genuinely feeling like they're being discriminated against. It doesn't mean it's real, but they're feeling it because they're losing privilege that was unearned to begin with. So if you're being walked up to the front of the line your whole life, right? If all of a sudden you've got to get in line with everybody else, that feels different. And it feels like, especially when somebody's telling you it's discrimination, right? Then it feels like, oh yeah, maybe that's what it is, because it doesn't feel right. But it's the loss of privileges that you shouldn't have had in the first place, because your skin color, your gender, your sexual orientation should have nothing to do with your nothing to do with your pay, nothing to do with your, with your life in that sense, right? So I think there's a point of empathy there, and a point, hopefully, where we can connect and we can say, hey, I get that you're feeling this way, but this isn't about race, right? This is about, you're feeling now competition, right? You're feeling now having to be in line with the rest of us. It doesn't feel great. I get that. But imagine if you were always walked to the end of the line, right? So I think that's an important point as well.
It is. It's a very important. The last one I wanted to talk about is want the ball. I like it because of, there was comparison between you and your brother, BG, right? But what stood out for me in that chapter was both of you do things differently, but the goal and the aim is the same.
Yes.
So it shows that people don't necessarily, if you don't feel like you're a good speaker, you don't have to do so. But how are you going to stand up against racism? How are you going to do it? So just give us a little about that chapter, please.
Right. So a big part of the whole book is the idea that we all have something to contribute in fighting against racism and other forms of oppression, because they're all connected, right? They're all meant to divide us, because it's only possible for that select few. In the United States, initially it was white male landowners, right? Now we're talking about billionaires, but that select few that has uber privilege, them to stay in power and to continue to exploit all the rest of us, they have to keep us divided.
True.
They have to, because otherwise we run things.
Exactly.
Right? Especially in a democracy, or close to a democracy that we have. But the big point here is that each of us have something to contribute in our own ways. And we have, and this is a lesson that comes out of, the little girl, it comes out of the packy, it comes out of all those things, that, each of us has a circle of influence, or multiple circles of influence in many cases. You have influence in your family, in your friend group, in your community, in maybe your school or your workplace, whatever it may be, in your field of study, whatever, that is going to be, that I don't have, right? So in your community, whatever it might be, your circle of influence, they're going to hear you differently than they're going to hear me.
Yes.
And I can get dismissed very easily. Oh, he's one of those left-wing, anti-racist, whatever, right? But if it comes from a peer, if it comes from a loved one, it has a different impact and a better impact, right? And so I really encourage the reader to imagine standing up, what that looks like for them,
Yes.
right? And like you said, that chapter talks about my brother BJ, who I think is still a little bit mad that he's not on the cover too. There's three of them. So BJ is 4 years younger than me. I'm the eldest, and then Casey was 11 months younger than me, and then BJ a few years later. But BJ he's worked in construction and retail, and now he's a manager at a plant, but we went very different routes. I got a PhD, and I try to be an educator in the world, right? And he's been doing more blue collar and worked his way up to management, right? But he looks different than me as well. The three boys, none of us looked alike. I look like mom. I've got dark hair and dark eyes. and BJ's got blonde hair and blue eyes, right? And so, and he's a big guy, drives a big black pickup truck, he looks like a good old boy. So he has a different impact when he says something than his, differently than what his nerdy older brother does, right? So, I think, I explore like how he's done things in his way and had huge impact. And that's great. And that's what we need, is just for everybody to stop standing on the sidelines. And, one of the things I was talking about the other day with a group was that, when we were kids, right? Think back to when you were in elementary school, or whenever you learned about the Holocaust and the slave trade and other atrocities that have happened in the world, right? Colonialism, whatever it might have been. None of us imagined ourselves as Nazis, right? None of us imagined ourselves as an overseer or an enslaver, right? We thought of ourselves as I would have been an abolitionist, right? I would have hidden Anne Frank and her family, right? I would have been that person. But the problem is that we learned that, there was the good and bad. But what we didn't really learn a lot about is all the people that enabled that, all the people that just did nothing, right?
Yeah.
And those are the people that enable the problem. And that, I think, is encouraged by those that aim to oppress. They encourage us to do nothing.
Yes.
We're encouraged, especially at work and in school, to just, hey, if you're not part of the problem, if you're not doing actively racism or whatever, then you're good. But if you're not there to say no when somebody does something that's racist, if you're not there to say, hey, wait a second, this process at work is having a sexist impact, right? Or to question, why is it that everybody at the top of our company is a white man? Or if you're not that person, if you're not there to say, you know what, why is it that almost every single book that my child is assigned in school is written by an old dead white guy?
True.
Why is that? If you're not there to ask that question and stand up and say, you know what, there are other narratives that are brilliant from around the planet by people who look like everybody, right? If you're not there to do that, it doesn't get done.
Right.
So we have to step up. We've gone too long with people just saying, "Oh, I'm not a racist, and that's all I have to do." No, it's not. You have to speak up. You have to do your part, and we can make progress. Otherwise, these regressive times continue to happen. The cycle will continue. And right now, the hate is strong, and it's fueled by people who benefit from it. I remember I went to Florida A&M University for my PhD, and this is a historically Black university. And one of the things that I learned there from a brilliant professor was to always question who something benefits. There's something wrong going on, and you think, geez, I don't understand why this is happening. I've got to figure a way to do something about it. The first question should be, who does this
benefit?
And that can help guide you. And so if it's benefiting the people that are causing our problems, then that's something to consider in how you act. And that, I hope, will help people to start to see solidarity with others that are being divided, right, for the same reason, to continue to exploit, whether it's here or in other parts of the world, right? Again, I think we have to think more globally. And, I think that's important, especially when we talk about, like, in this country, we hear a lot of majority minority, right?
Yes.
The reality is that people of color are the vast majority globally.
Very true.
White folks make up less than 10% of the planet, right?
You're right.
Most people, that doesn't even compute if they're in the United States. Most US Americans think that white folks are the majority everywhere. And it's not even close to true.
Right.
I think that, again, if we can start to see each other as brothers and sisters, as siblings in this struggle, and recognize that, your struggle with sexism or racism or whatever it might be is no different than my struggle with, something else that's oppressing me.
Right.
It's all meant to keep us divided. There's a reason why those divides are so entrenched and so promoted, is to keep us from saying, hey, wait, it's not the guy next to me who's struggling just as much as me that's the problem, right? It's the guy that's buying his third yacht or a spaceship.
True. Yes. Yes.
That maybe that's who's benefiting. from
Yes.
our exploitation. So
Yes.
I want to get off my soapbox, but I think that chapter, I use the analogy of basketball because I talk about basketball in the book. It was a big part of my life. And I say want the ball, meaning you got to want to be in the game. You got to want to step up to do your part, whatever that
Yes.
is, right? And it doesn't mean you have to become a diversity, equity, and inclusion professional. It means have impact where you can have impact. And so
Yes.
when you
And you said something very profound in the book where you said, what good are values if they only exist in your mouth?
Yes. And it's funny that a lot of people, when I wrote, I had a lot of editors and everything, and they were like, what does that mean? I was like, it makes sense to me.
I mean, if you only think about it and you only say it to yourself and you don't speak it out, it has no good because nobody is hearing it more than just you.
Right. And if you're just talking about it and not doing anything.
I'm not doing anything about it.
Right.
Then what?
Right. And so that was a core value for our family was like,
yes,
you've got to live your values. And if they only exist in your mouth, then they're not real.
they're
right?
not real. No,
They're not. Yeah.
they're not real. Another
I'm really
thing
glad that you saw that.
Yes, I actually really do like it. I saw it and I was like, that's a really good point.
Yes, I love it.
That's a really good point that you made. Another point that kind of stood up for me is when you said anti-racist engagement begins internally with unlearning racism and building up an anti-racist literature. And it's something also that we need to look in ourselves to ask ourselves, do I have racist tendency? Sometimes we may not think we do, but then something happens and we say things against different races or whatever it is. And we need to ask ourselves, do I? Because sometimes doing introspection helps us to see where we're at. And if it is that we do, how can I change this internally so that I can be better for my brothers and sisters? Because some people believe it doesn't affect them.
Right.
It does affect you, whether it is you want to believe it or not. So what are you going to do about it?
Absolutely. And I won't go into it, but I talk in the book about how it affects all of us, even those of us who think that racism doesn't impact us, folks that look like me. But yes, especially now, everybody seems to have an opinion on everything, no matter how little they know about it. They're posting about it with no knowledge whatsoever. We see that even in my field. Like there's all these people going back and forth on television, on our podcasts and on radio about DEI. And they barely know what the words mean, right?
Listen, I think it means something to everybody personally, whatever someone can come up with.
Yeah, but there's a profession, right? Like they study this stuff. We do work. We do actual work. Talking to people that actually do the work.
Right.
I think that's a sort of a symptom of a lot of things in this country and around the world. People just have opinions and they don't seem to think that they should actually have learned something first to sort of inform that opinion. With respect to race and racism, I think it's important that we educate ourselves. And that doesn't mean going on your social media feed that's just going to feed you whatever you want, whatever it thinks you want to hear. It means actually pick up a book, right? Pick up mine, read somebody else's, read a book.
Research.
Talk to real people. And we all know how we learn, because when there's something we have to learn, we know what to do. Right? We have a process, all of us. It is different, different people learn different ways. My daughter, she'll jump on YouTube real quick to learn how to do things, right? She'll like, I looked on YouTube and it might not have occurred to me, right? We all know how we best learn.
Yes.
But I think it's important to start listening to voices that are different from what we hear every day, particularly on the media feeds.
Yes.
They're designed, the algorithm is designed to tell you to say things that you want to hear. So you're not learning anything. You're just getting an echo of what you already think.
Yes.
So we've got to start, being willing to have lifelong learning and to continue to engage with different folks. I'll say this real quick. One of the things that I encounter quite a bit, I work with a lot of leaders, right, in higher education, like presidents and diversity officers. I work with CEOs and whatever. A lot of people that have accomplished quite a bit in their life. And, too often, these are folks who are very intelligent people, but when you start to bring up the issue of racism, they suddenly become quite dull. Right. And I have to call them on it and say, you were brilliant 10 minutes ago. What happened?
What happened? Yeah.
And I almost always get this well, I grew up in blah, 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 and that's why I don't know. And my immediate answer is, okay, well, you're how old now? Right? You're 50, you're 60, whatever you are.
Resources are there.
Time. It's been a long time since your parents decided where you were going to go to school.
Exactly.
For the last 20, 30, 40 years, you've been making decisions. So let's not try to say, oh, it's because of where I grew up. It's because of decisions you've made.
And choosing to stay ignorant is not good enough.
Yeah. And I think that's where we have to really focus, because it's those everyday decisions. If they're informed by, an anti-racist perspective, it's those little decisions that are going to make a difference in the world. Right.
True.
Just like, some people are informed by their faith. Some people are informed by their belief in environmentalism. Whatever it might be, the things you deeply believe in, they inform the things you do every day.
True.
It informs where you shop, who you date. It informs everything you do. So let this be something that informs decisions you make and the actions that you take.
Very true. Very true. Dr. Jojo, we have come to the end. I want you to let persons know where is it that they can find you.
The easiest way is to find me on my website, drjojo.com, drjoejoe.com. And the book is available wherever you like to buy books.
Lovely, lovely. I want to tell you thank you so much for sharing. I enjoy the conversation and even sharing different perspectives on different avenues that we can look at, in terms of being educated about racism and not just staying in our own circle or in our own bubble, but going beyond that to educate ourselves and not just be okay with not knowing.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I think this has been a conversation people can learn from, even if it's just the idea that we can have these tough conversations and still have a good laugh here and there.
True. Awesome.
Enjoy it. Yes.
So thank you again so much. And I want to say thank you so much to my listeners for continuing to listen to The Unfiltered by Jade. And we'll be back next week, Tuesday. Thank you. Bam, bam,